All right, and so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning again. My name is Jaleesa Tate from MEMA. I am the State Hazard Mitigation Officer. Thank you all for joining us today for our first kind of like webinar in our BRIC and FMA Technical Assistance series. So today we're really going to focus on developing the project scope. I want to make sure that people are understanding that we are not talking about the project scoping category of funding today, but we are talking about actually developing like the narrative scope, the scope of work, the schedule, and the budget for your proposal today. So I just want to let everyone know that for today, the meeting is being recorded. We will ask you to mute your microphones. Please also turn off your cameras if you are not speaking today, just so we can try and avoid any type of technical issues as far as internet connections and speed, things like that. If you have questions today, you are free to put them into the chat. However, we will be using a built-in kind of thing called Slido today. If you've participated in some other mitigation webinars, you have used it before. I'll get into what Slido is and how it works in just a second. But if everybody could kind of familiarize yourself with how MS Teams is set up. So please make sure you know where your camera on and off toggle is, the mute and unmute button, how to put into the chat. And then that way we can have a really nice and smooth meeting today. So as far as interacting with Slido, I'm going to go ahead and ask everybody to get set up now. So as we go through questions and points to interact in the presentation today, you'll already be set up. So you can either do this if you have dual screens, do it from your laptop, or if you want to do it through your cell phone, that's easy as well too. So you're just going to go to slido.com, and then when you get to that page, the first page that comes up will look like this right here. So the code that you're going to enter is just scoping in capital letters, and then that'll take you right into the meeting for today. So please submit your questions that you have through Slido today. That way it provides the opportunity for us to make sure we have a record of all of them. And then at the end of all these, the series, we can put together like an FAQ to send out to people who either could not participate, or also like as a reference guide for you to refer back to if maybe someone asked a similar question in a session, but you didn't quite catch the answer. The way that Slido works is that as you enter questions, they'll all be compiled, and then we'll be able to go through each one at the end of the presentation. As a participant, you are able to see everybody else's questions, and then you can quote unquote like a question to make it popular, move it to the list. Today, I am going to very, very strongly encourage everyone to use this feature, ask as many questions as you would like to, and not wait until after the session to email us individually to answer questions. We can certainly answer questions about project specifics and things like that individually, but since it's a new program that we're going over, I anticipate a lot of you have similar questions. So let's do the benefit for the entire group and ask those today while you have everyone here. So with that, what all we're going to cover today is going to be the difference and similarities of these grant programs versus like some general other programs, the eligibility requirements again, activity identification, how to develop your scoping narrative to include the scope of work, the schedule, the budget, how the proposals will be evaluated, and then we'll wrap up with some final reminders and again that question and answer session. So today we've allotted roughly about 40 minutes for us to present and provide you information, with 20 minutes allotted for us to go through various questions that you all might have today. Okay, so the first Slido question that we have is kind of what prior experience with different grant programs do you have experience? So have you worked with FEMA programs, EPA programs, HUD, state programs, local nonprofits, or private sector programs? And if you have worked with something else, feel free to also like put that in the chat. And that way, this will just provide an opportunity for us to know kind of like what experience you have and how these grants might differ from some of the other grants that you might have prior experience with. So we'll give everybody a minute or so to respond to that. All right, and we'll provide about 15 more seconds or so, so please go ahead and get your answers in, so that way we kind of know what the makeup is of what people have experience with. All right, so from these results, it looks like the majority of folks have experience with state grants, which obviously would operate very differently from federal grants, and then with the next category being more federal grants and local and nonprofit grants as well too. So what we wanted to do today was kind of go through some of the most popular questions that we've been getting from people who may not have experience working with the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance programs previously. So these are some of the frequent questions that we've been getting. So who do you submit the actual application to? So for the BRIC and FMA programs, you actually submit your sub-application to MEMA, and then MEMA will submit it to FEMA. So for other programs, you might generally be submitting directly to the grantor, but for this one, MEMA actually serves as the sole applicant and recipient of the grant for the entire state of Maryland. So you have to submit to us, and then MEMA will prepare a state application that is then submitted to FEMA that contains all of our sub-applications as well. So what is the deadline to submit an application? If you've been out there on the internet, like Googling these programs or attending some of the national webinars that FEMA has been hosting, you're probably seeing January 29, 2021 as the deadline. If you send me something January 29, 2021, rest assured your proposal will not make it to FEMA. The state of Maryland's deadline is November 20th, 2020, which is coming up very soon. So by that time, you need to make sure that your sub-application is submitted to MEMA through FEMA Go. The state's application is due to FEMA January 20th, 2021. And in fact, FEMA actually stopped offering technical assistance to states starting January 27th, 2021. And so based on those dates, if you have ventured into FEMA Go, you have probably experienced some technical issues. I anticipate that when the state gets ready to submit our application in FEMA Go, we will also be experiencing some technical issues. Therefore, the state of Maryland will be submitting our application before January 27th to ensure that we're able to receive technical assistance and that it doesn't put anybody, any of our local jurisdictions or state agency sub-applications in jeopardy of not being able to be submitted. So how does that differ from other programs? Other grant programs, you generally just have one deadline because you're submitting your application directly to your grantor. And we'll have a fact sheet that's going to be available on our website. I'll also send this out to you after the presentation today that has a nice timeline for everybody so that there's no confusion about when you need to get materials to us. Another question is, can you apply for more than one project? Yes, you can apply for multiple projects, but there are some restrictions as far as like the actual amount of funding that you're able to receive. And so again, if there are questions about that, those are explained in the notice of funding opportunity, and we'll also be uploading our previous presentation that detailed a lot of the provisions that are in the notice of funding opportunity as well too. So from what I'm gathering, there are other grant programs where you may be limited on the actual number of projects and applications that you may be able to submit, but that is not the case for the FEMA HMA program. So can you apply for subsequent years of funding? Yes, but each proposal must be standalone. So that means if you apply for FY20 and you are awarded funding, you can certainly come in for a different project in FY 2021, but you wouldn't be able to come in and like get additional funding for that same proposal in FY 2021. So for other grant programs, either those programs, they may not be offered on an annual basis, or it might be set up where you can only receive funding once your entire project is complete. So that's the difference between like the FEMA HMA programs and then some of the other grant programs out there. Where can you learn more about the specifics of the program? So again, not only do I encourage you to read the notice of funding opportunity, it's our expectation that you're going to take the time to actually look over the notice of funding opportunity, because that is what establishes all the criteria for the actual grant. And that's how you're going to know exactly if what you are proposing and the project that you're putting forth is actually meeting the criteria of the grant program. This is the same thing that you would do for other grant programs. You would read the request for proposals to make sure that you are preparing an application that meets the guidelines of the grant program. And if you need to know, get access to the notice of funding opportunity, it's available on grant site.
So again, just reiterating, make sure you read the notice of funding opportunity, because you may have experience working with other grants, but that does not mean that these grants operate the same as those grants that you have prior experience working with. All right. So as far as sub-applicant eligibility, again, I just want to make sure everybody is very clear. Only local governments and state agencies are eligible sub-applicants. If you are like an individual or a business or a nonprofit, you have to actually be sponsored by a local government or state agency in order for you to put in an application. The local governments and state agencies then essentially submit their applications to MEMA, and MEMA again will submit applications to FEMA. Right? Other important things about eligibility, you have to have a local hazard mitigation plan. These are very important things. It's either like, if you have it, you're good to go. If you don't, there's no way around that. You're just not eligible and you kind of have to sit this round out. If you want to know what the status of your hazard mitigation plan is, I provided the link and we will send out the presentation afterwards, but it's just linking to a map that's on the MEMA mitigation website, right? And then as far as building codes, if you have a project, so think of a construction activity, then you have to have adopted previously, not like in the process, but already have adopted the 2015 or the 2018 International Building Code and International Residential Code as well too. And if you want to confirm with your local building code official what code you have adopted, what's in place, that link is provided, and again we'll provide this after the presentation this morning. All right, so as far as activity eligibility, so if you're familiar with the pre-disaster mitigation programs, all of those activities such as elevating homes, acquisition demolition projects for an individual home, flood control type projects, all of that stuff is still eligible. BRIC does expand the eligibility a little bit more, and most of that expanded eligibility is in the capacity and capability building category. But just keep in mind that your projects, they need to be cost effective. They have to be reducing or eliminating a risk from a natural hazard. That's very important. They need to, again, have those, one of the two latest IBC or IRC codes adopted. They need to align with the local and state hazard mitigation plans, and then you have to meet all the EHP requirements as well too. So now we're going to get a little bit more into writing the actual scope of work for your project. But what we want to do is kind of hear what are some of the concerns that you have about the application process. So if you have concerns with you're not really sure what category your project fits into, like enter that. If you have concerns with FEMA Go, feel free to enter that information as well too. So this will kind of let us know what areas we need to focus on as we're providing technical assistance to folks. So I'm going to give you a minute or two to respond to that, and then people, you can put in more than one response as well too. All right, and I'm gonna give folks maybe like 30 more seconds or so to enter things in. And I'm not seeing a lot of responses, so I anticipate that I'm not going to be receiving any more questions in my email. All right, so we're going to start going through some of these. So the November 20th deadline is not far away. The environmental webinar is far away, and you may require work to gather that data. So I want to make it very clear that you should not be waiting on any of these webinars to start your application process. The webinars are simply meant here to provide some additional information, but you should already be in the process of developing your application. There are a lot of resources that are already available if you just Google them, as far as what information to compile for the grant programs and different things like that. What information will be entered by MEMA? Not really sure what you mean by this question, but no information will be entered by MEMA. The responsibility to prepare the sub-application is a sub-applicant responsibility. So if you need clarity on that, please let me know. Can we apply for A&E for construction? Yes, you can, but it kind of depends on how you're going about the project. So if you're strictly just want to get like the funding for the architectural and engineering for right now, that would be more of a project scoping activity versus like a construction activity. And then we can talk about like if you wanted to group those together. But grouping those together, it poses some issues because without the engineering already being completed, FEMA is generally unable to confirm that it's technically feasible. So it kind of puts you in an awkward position where your project might not be awarded. Providing the correct documentation and who does what. So as far as documentation, I would say literally everything that you're putting into the grant application should be properly documented. We will have a resource guide that we'll send to you all with like various links and sources for you to get information. FEMA Go registration. So have you emailed mitigation.mema@maryland.gov with your DUNS number, point of contact, email address, and what roles you would like to have? If not, please be sure to do that after the webinar today so we can provide you assistance for getting registered. How exhaustive the grant writing should be. Is there a page limit? Do you have someone to recommend for grant writing? So we can't recommend anybody for grant writing. I am unsure if there is an actual page limit within FEMA Go. However, our rule of thumb is that you should be very detailed in your applications. The applications get submitted to a national review panel, so you should act as if the person that is getting your grant application does not know anything about Maryland or your community whatsoever. So you want to make sure that you're very descriptive in that. So you've experienced problems with the fire grants in FEMA Go in the past year. I anticipate that those problems will continue, unfortunately, and there's been a lot of issues already nationwide with FEMA Go as far as like the registration process, which again is why we are really stressing for people to make sure that they are registering and getting a FEMA Go as early as possible. Not seeing the BRIC grants in your FEMA Go, so then just confirm that you've sent your DUNS number and your point of contact and what roles you should have to the mitigation email account. When you register in FEMA Go, you will not see the BRIC grants because MEMA has to manually add you to those grants. So until you send us your DUNS number, the point of contact, stuff like that, you won't be added and you won't see the BRIC grants. Do not wait until November 19th to do that because obviously a lot of people are going to be trying to get assistance from us and only MEMA can add you to those grants. All right. Is there something that you need to do to get the sub-application link? You need to go to FEMA Go and register and create an account. DUNS number. Did you register for a DUNS number in sam.gov? All right. So there are lots of concerns, lots of FEMA Go questions. I would again direct you back to the emails that we've sent out with the FEMA Go registration instructions. And if you're having issues getting registered, please contact us at the mitigation.mema@maryland.gov email account. It's been a challenging process nationwide, to say the least. And I would strongly encourage you not to wait until we are too far in the grant process to try and get registered in the system. All right, and with that, I'm gonna kick it over to Kristen, the lead hazard mitigation specialist, to go more into the actual developing the scope for the project.
Great, thank you, Jaleesa. So most of you have already submitted a notice of interest to our office as a preliminary project proposal. So now it's time to develop the project. So as you develop your project, you need to consider the following in order to develop the best preferred project. So identify alternatives. You know, what other options have been looked into to mitigate the hazard, and why is this the best option you're pursuing? Evaluating the technical feasibility. So this can be evaluated through engineering design, schematics, etc. Evaluating the effectiveness. So that can be done through the benefit cost analysis. Review costs, making sure that they are in alignment with the project and eligible for the project. You can refer to the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Guidance, which is a FEMA published document, for more information. And identify potential adverse environmental and historical impacts. So EHP is a major component of the review process at FEMA, and it's important to understand any and all of those impacts so that you can document it and answer the questions throughout the sub-application thoroughly. And also ensure that you properly document the process in order to strengthen your application. So all documentation that is submitted within your sub-application gets reviewed by FEMA. So the more documentation you have, the better chance you have to prove your need for the project and tell your story. So this is we prepared a graphic, and this will be emailed out to you after the webinar, and it will also be available on our website for download. It includes all the required information for both CCB activities and project activities, and it goes into what projects are eligible, the scope of work, what's required for that, such as the alignment to the current hazard mitigation plan, any lifelines that can be impacted, and the proposed funding shares. It goes into the BCA requirements, so please note that for the CCB and planning activities, you do not need a BCA, but you do for project activities. And then we also have included EHP information, so such as ground disturbance, any endangered species within that area, etc. And once again, this is only required for those project activities. So this document is a good high-level overview of the requirements that are needed, and so it helps you understand the level of effort you're going to be needing to put into each of those sections. So the scoping narrative describes the proposed activity and includes these three main elements: the scope of work, the schedule, and the budget. So the scoping narrative really stipulates the deliverables, identifies your tasks required to complete your project, and it defines the tasks to be completed in a clear, concise, meaningful way. So all elements must match tasks and provide sufficient amount of detail for FEMA to determine if this is an eligible application. The scoping narrative will become part of the conditions of the award if it does get approved. So make sure that you're clearly portraying what you're trying to accomplish and what you need to accomplish. Since BRIC and FMA sub-applications are submitted to national review panels, write your narrative as if the reviewer has no clue where Maryland is, has no idea of what hazards we encounter, and the need for this activity. So reviewers can come from all across the country, so they really are reading all these sub-applications blind in a sense. So the first component of the scoping narrative is the scope of work. This really tells you the who, what, when, where, why. So the project scope of work identifies your eligible activity or project. It describes what's being accomplished and explains how that mitigation activity is planning on being implemented. So the activity must be described in sufficient detail to verify the cost estimate and to make sure that everything is in alignment with your narrative. So the scope of work includes the goals and objectives of your project, a brief description of the need for the project, the problems that the project will address, and the methodology that will be used to implement the project. So something important to note is that FEMA, with all activities, FEMA requires FEMA has different requirements for project and planning scopes of work, so it will be a little different. The scope of work is a binding contract with FEMA, so once the project is approved, you must make sure that you accomplish everything that you put within your scope of work. So some questions for consideration for project sub-applications when writing your scope of work. What is the proposed project? So is it a generator for a critical facility, a residential elevation that's going to be elevated 3 feet above BSE, etc.? Who will be benefiting from the mitigation activity? So will it be a single family, a single individual, or maybe an entire community? How will the activity solve the problem? So is this planning on being a long-term solution for the community? Why is this the best alternative? So what other options were researched and why is this the best alternative? An alternative that you can use additionally can be no action taken. Where is the project located? So this can be the address with the latitude and longitude, or let's say if it's a generator, you include the area that it will be placed alongside the building, or if it's a study, you're talking about the geographical extent and the boundaries that will be looked into. When would the project take place? So this is the time frame and how maybe seasonal change such as hurricane season can impact your schedule. Who is managing and performing the work? So will it be managed in-house at a local level or will it be contracted out? And then will there be long-term maintenance and associated costs? So if maintenance is needed, such as cleaning out a culvert, who will be responsible for paying and doing it? So then questions for consideration for planning activities. We have first, what were the recommendations for areas of improvement from the last plan? So refer back to the recommendations that FEMA provided for their last hazard mitigation plan review as an example, and make sure you address those. What sources of data, what are your sources for data, and do you have any data gaps? So will you be using historical data, National Weather Service data, data from your local GIS department, etc.? And are there any gaps where you need more data? What needs to be updated? So are there sections within your plan that need a little bit of extra attention? What do the communities want you to address in this plan? How many jurisdictions will be participating? How many meetings and workshops will you hold? And also what format do you plan on having them in a virtual format, on social media, on your website, etc. When it comes to, are you integrating the plan update with other planning processes? So plan integration is something that FEMA pushes and wants to see. So instead of duplicating efforts, understand what plans align with your update and see how they can be incorporated in your process. Are there public or private assets that are not included in your current hazard mitigation plan? And what is known about any exposed assets that may affect vulnerability and impacts? And I just realized I skipped one. Are you hiring a consultant? Just make sure that if a consultant is hired, that they are able to capture the entire community and not making the plan ordinary. Okay, and then the next component of the scoping narrative would be the schedule. So the schedule includes all tasks identified within your scope of work and the relationship to each activity to the cost estimate. So make sure that you include all tasks necessary to complete your project, and it can include your descriptions and timeframes. So the schedule includes deliverables. So as an example, it could be maybe a draft hazard mitigation plan, your finalized plan, etc. Key milestones. So major milestones that if not complete on the time and the time frame that you want, it may result in the cancellation of your project. And also progress of these major milestones can be recorded in your quarterly reports once the project is approved to make sure that you're in alignment with what you're trying to do. Deadlines, so making sure you have a time frame from when you want to start and end that portion. The responsible party, so who is going to be responsible for completing that task, meaning a local point of contact, a contractor, homeowner, etc. And then the period of performance. So typically the schedule is within 36 months or less, but for highly complex BRIC projects, you can request a longer period of performance from FEMA for their review and approval, but you must consult with MEMA first before requesting a longer period of performance. And then the final component of the scoping narrative is the budget. So the budget, also known as the cost estimate, matches the scope of work and the schedule within your narrative. So cost estimates include various categories. such as labor, materials, equipment, and subcontractor costs. So any documentation to support the cost estimate should sub-application if that cost is reasonable. So the budget includes no lump sums, so they must be broken down into single line items, no lump sum costs. We have pre-award costs and management costs, which I'll explain in the next slide. Contingency costs. So a contingency cost is allowable, and it's an allowance to cover situations that can't be fully defined at the time, so it must be included as a line item and documented. One thing to note is that inflation is not considered a contingency cost, but some examples can include unstable soil conditions, steep embankments, environmental considerations, things along those lines. And then we have the cost share. So on the right-hand side, you can see that the BRIC and the FMA cost shares are broken down. The typical cost share is a 75% federal and 25% non-federal split. Have a cost share up to 90-10 or 100-0. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the notice of funding opportunity that was released by FEMA, where you can find the definitions of a small and impoverished community, repetitive loss, and severe repetitive loss to see if your project meets those criteria. And one thing to note too, there is a non-federal match. It cannot come from a federal source, it cannot be program income, and it cannot be used to meet another federal grant. The non-federal share doesn't have to come in a hard cash match. It can be met in other ways, such as donated resources, staff time, etc. So then to go into the allowable costs for pre-award and management costs. So directly related developing your sub-application. So that can include anything from compiling MEPA data for the EHP section, developing your BCA, preparing design specifications, conducting workshops, things along those lines. They can be incurred prior to the date of the grant award, but it has to be within a reasonable time and it should be properly documented. This can be identified as a line item within your budget, but make sure that you note it can only be reimbursed if your project is awarded. Management costs are any indirect costs, any direct administrative costs, and other administrative expenses. So these can include anything along technical monitoring, general administration expenses, personnel, accounting, administration, etc. So there's a max of 5% that you can request of the total project cost. So let's say your project is $100,000. You can include a management cost line, and 5% of that is $5,000. So that's the max that you can request. If you request management costs and it gets approved, FEMA will provide the 100% funding, so you do not have to have a non-federal match with that. So now I will hand it over to Julissa, and she will discuss the ranking and evaluation criteria.
All right, thanks, Chris. Okay, so for MEMA, you will go through basically like 2 different rounds of ranking. So when you apply and you send your application to MEMA, we have a state interagency review panel that's called the Mitigation Advisory Committee. And so we will then like kind of review applications. We might come back to you and ask for additional information to try and make your application stronger, or if we feel there are gaps in the information that's being presented and stuff like that, because it's very important for us to submit the strongest applications possible. So this is the ranking criteria that we use essentially. So as far as like state priorities, we are definitely looking for community-based projects that have a benefit to like more than one individual, but a larger portion of the population. Acquisition demolition projects will be prioritized over elevation projects, and then so and so on. For a complete breakdown with like the descriptions of each one of the categories, it's available on our website. And if you've kind of like this is your second or third time applying for the grant, it's the same ranking that we've been using since roughly 2018 too. So then what risk are you proposing to reduce or eliminate? If you have a construction activity and then like an advanced assistance activity, we're again looking at how many people does that actually benefit, or is it like more of an individual project? For a hazard mitigation planning project, we're looking at where do you fall on that 5-year planning wheel, the cost effectiveness. Do you have your scope of work? Does that kind of exemplify that maybe you've thought about this completely out, so that you will be able to be successful when you start to implement the project? We're going to be making sure that your application is complete, so that all the information that we need is in there. Looking at the social vulnerability, so we use the CDC's vulnerability index. And then the Mitigation Advisory Committee is able to give like an overall ranking for your application. So, and that looks a little bit more holistically and comprehensively at like the risk reduction initiatives that you've been implementing in your community overall. So kind of new with BRIC is FEMA doing like a technical or I guess adding transparency to their technical and qualitative evaluations. So essentially, once a project has kind of passed the eligibility and completeness review for FEMA so that it meets those basic requirements, essentially, for things that are put into the national competition pot, these kind of technical reviews and stuff, they'll be used to prioritize how the projects are funded. All right. So for the technical evaluation, and again, the charts and everything are in the notice of funding opportunity. So for the technical evaluation, it's kind of like you get your full points or you get 0 points. So again, strongly encourage you to look at the evaluation criteria and write your projects to make sure that you are getting as many points as possible. So they are looking for infrastructure projects, hence the name of the program, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. They're focusing on lifelines, and are you mitigating one or more community lifeline? Are you incorporating nature-based solutions? They're looking at the building code requirement, your BSEGS rating. If you have previously received an advanced assistance award, is this application for this project or kind of like coming from one of those advanced assistance awards? In Maryland, I think the only communities that have had previous advanced assistance awards are the city of Laurel and then Baltimore City. Are you providing an increased non-federal cost share? That will get you points as well too. And then are you applying from a small impoverished community? That will get you additional points. So then as far as the qualitative evaluation, this is really the opportunity where they are saying, hey, in your scope of work narrative that you've written, this is where you can really take the opportunity to try and get as many points as possible. So these points are awarded on more of a graded scale. So, you know, if there are 10 points available, you can get 7, and it's not just a 0 or 10. So they're looking at your risk reduction and your resiliency, how you are addressing and incorporating future conditions. So it's not just for climate change and sea level rise, it's also for like your population and demographics and land use as well too in your community. Looking at your implementation measures. So does your scope of work clearly identify like who's going to be managing the project, how the project is going to be implemented? Looking at the population that's being impacted. So these things again need to be very well spelled out in the application. We have had instances where, let's just say somebody says they have a community of 50,000. Well, FEMA still wants you to provide documentation of that, even if it is a screenshot of the census data saying, hey, we have a population of 50,000. And you also want to be descriptive of the population that you're serving as well too. And again, have the documentation to back up everything that you're saying in that description. So they'll look at how are you doing outreach for your project, and then what types of partnerships are you leveraging as well too. So a lot of these things that FEMA is looking for in your qualitative evaluation are very similar to some of the things that MEMA is going to be looking for when we evaluate your project as well too. All right, so we're going to wrap up here so we can get into more questions that you may have. So mainly the takeaways from today are for your scope for your project. There are 3 key categories: the scope of work, the schedule, and the budget. So basically, you want to make sure all of this aligns and is consistent. Big things to take away about your scope of work: make sure you clearly identified your tasks and actions, your deliverables, the staff that will be performing the project or carrying it out, documenting your EHP conformance, making sure that FEMA is able to effectively look at your technical feasibility and then the effectiveness of your project as well too. So your schedule needs to be consistent with your scope of work. It needs to be 3 years or less unless you are applying for an extension because you have a highly complex project. You need to identify your key milestones, and most of all, your schedule needs to be reasonable and achievable. And then for the budget, again, consistent with what you put in the scope of work, it needs to be cost effective. So if you have a benefit cost ratio that is less than 1.0, you're automatically ineligible. So make sure that you have a project that is cost effective and that that's verified through FEMA's benefit cost analysis as well too. Clearly identify what the cost share is going to be. Again, maximum 75% federal, minimum 25% non-federal, but you get those additional points if you provide a greater non-federal match. And then it needs to be a line item breakdown, so you can't have any type of lump sum budgets. We see that a lot with generator requests, mostly where people just put in one single line item for the generator, but that is unacceptable to FEMA. So make sure that you have it broken down. All right, so here are a few reminders. Again, the FEMA Go registration is so critically important. We've been receiving a lot of questions about like what information is needed for the application and different things like that. FEMA Go is your gateway into the application. So if you register for FEMA Go, you will have access to the application and you can see the actual application and figure out what's going to be needed for the application. And again, I cannot stress enough the numerous challenges that have been unearthed, if you will, with the FEMA Go registration. So again, critically important that you get us that information so we can work on getting you registered as soon as possible. We have had a variety of challenges with like the people who are registered to your organization as the eBiz POC or like authorized organization representative are no longer in those positions, or maybe you can't get a hold of them, but unfortunately those are the only individuals who can add you to your organization. So that creates like an entirely new process where you have to get somebody else in your organization into that role. So again, please do not wait until like the week that the applications are due to try and get into FEMA Go. Strongly encourage you, I can't encourage you enough to go ahead, get us that information so we can work on getting you registered. Even if you are on the fence, if you are going to proceed with an application or not, still encourage you to go ahead and get registered into FEMA Go so at least you can see the actual application. And again, a reminder, applications are going to be due to MEMA in FEMA Go no later than November 20th. And so because I've gotten a lot of feedback on our timeline and different things like that, I just want to make it very clear there are a lot of things that have to happen post November 20th on the state side of things to make sure we're meeting all of FEMA's requirements. We have a successful grant season. So this is not a soft deadline, it is a hard deadline, and it is a strategic deadline to make sure that the state of Maryland is well positioned to be successful throughout this grant process. So we've kind of established a timeline, and like I said, all of this is included on with the infographic that has all the information about the CCB activities and then the project activities. So you will receive that today, and you will receive the PowerPoint presentation as well today too. All right, so with that, again, FEMA Go, it is literally like the nexus of all of this. So we just want to take the temperature on like who is registered in FEMA Go. Do you have an account? Because that's like step one. Has your account been confirmed? And I've replied back to you like, yes, you're added to your sub-organization, you're attached to MEMA. Because like I know people are saying, well, we don't see like the BRIC grants and stuff like that. These are a lot of bugs in the FEMA Go system. So we want to try and gauge where everybody is right now. So take a few minutes to respond back to that, or a few seconds. All right. Okay. All right, so it looks like the majority of people are in the categories of maybe you've done step 1 and you have your FEMA Go account, or else you have not registered for a FEMA Go account at all. So again, we will reblast the email with the instructions today. Please, please, please create a FEMA Go account. Send us your DUNS number, the email address for the individual that you'd like to have access to the system, and then those roles, the roles are either going to be sub-applicant member or sub-applicant authorized representative. And the difference is that the authorized representative can submit the application, whereas the member cannot. So again, if you do nothing else today, please just give us the information for FEMA Go. It has not been an easy process. For some people it has, for most people it has not. And we really want to make sure everybody has access and can get to the actual applications. All right. All right. So we'll go into the question and answer portion now. So yes, we will be providing the PowerPoint slides to all the participants. So we'll email that out so that you have the links and stuff like that. All right, we finally got all right, the historic or environmental and historic preservation requirements. All right, so what we'll do is I'll send out, there is a, to be honest, FEMA does not provide very clear guidance on what the EHP requirements are as far as documentation, because honestly, it is a little different with each project. What we will do is send out an environmental and historic preservation checklist, and you can use that as a guide as you start kind of going through to see if your project hits certain markers and kind of what types of information you'll need to be providing. All right. I have emailed MEMA for guidance. So for this particular individual, if you want to unmute and like ask what questions you have, so that we can respond to you, or if you want to remain anonymous and then just send your email again. The FEMA info is not specific on what is required. That's unfortunate because that's all the information that we have as well too. But if you feel it's not specific, we can certainly work with you to address what questions you have. And if we can't, we'll happily email the FEMA BRIC helpline for you as well too. All right. What are alternatives typically used for generator projects? So most often, and I'll let Kristen touch upon this as well too, generally for a generator project, the alternative is going to be like a no action alternative. So what happens if you just don't get a generator? That unfortunately, if an emergency were to happen, you just wouldn't have backup power for that facility. And Kristen, do you have anything to add for like generator alternatives?
Yes, so action is typically what we see, but you can also include something like a smaller size generator that would only supply power to maybe half of the building instead. Those are typically the two main alternatives that we see.
Thank you. All right, so what are the state priorities? Again, it's on our website, but we'll include this. And I think somebody's taking notes because I keep saying we're going to include a lot and I'm going to forget when I get off of here. But we'll include the ranking sheet that kind of spells out what the priorities are and everything when we send out the slides and everything. And so this is being recorded, but I'll go ahead and send out the slides and the resources prior to the recording, just because the recording can take a day or two to be edited and trimmed. All right. So for, the executive order, you will select yes. Part of the process that happens after you submit the applications to MEMA is that we submit all the sub-applications to Maryland State Clearinghouse process, which satisfies the requirement to meet EO 12372. Will MEMA select only a limited number of applicants to FEMA? So this is this really is something that we will never know until we have all the applications. So essentially, the benefit this year with BRIC is that BRIC does not place a limit on the number of projects that we can submit. So if you have a project application, so again, think like a construction activity, because there is no limit, what will happen is MEMA, again, as the applicant, we have to rank every single project that we submit. So, you know, if we get 30 project activities, they get ranked 1 through 30, and then FEMA will review those in our ranking order. For the CCB activities, it's a little different. So for the CCB category, that can only be applied for in what FEMA terms to be this state allocation. So this, every state and territory and the tribes are allocated a certain amount of money. That amount is $600,000. However, within that $600,000 category, also all hazard mitigation planning has to be submitted up to $300,000. So we have $300,000 that's already earmarked for local hazard mitigation plans, and then we have $300,000 remaining to support CCB activities. So when we got in our notices, we received roughly like $15 million in requests for like CCB activities. So yes, that will be narrowed down quite a bit so that it is within the limits that we have to request for funding. But for projects, it's kind of open, but you will be ranked and then prioritized. What is the percentage that is allowed as a contingency in the cost estimate? The project design is being developed. Typically, the cost is being refined as we go. All right, so I'm going to let Kristen answer the contingency cost because she probably knows the exact percentage. As far as the project design and stuff like that, so we do know that costs change. We know that materials and labor change as well too, and we know that these projects are not quickly awarded, and more often than not, the cost estimates that were originally gathered for the projects are not any good 2 years down the road when the projects are finally awarded. Unfortunately, for these annual grants, FEMA does not allow us to request any additional funding. So those are things that you'll need to take into consideration as you're preparing your budget. And Kristen, do you know the exact percentage that's allowed for the contingency?
Yep, so typically it's recommended 1 to 5% for contingency. If it's a historic property, you can go up to 7%, and you can refer back to the HMA guidance for more information on contingency costs too.
All right, thank you. It won't go away. Okay, so are projects reimbursable through the grant? I believe this question is asking if projects are already completed, is that reimbursable through the grant? The answer to that is no. If it is a construction activity and you have started working like any type of in the ground activity prior to the grant being awarded, the grant is not eligible. If it is an activity, if it is a pre-award cost, so again, like a cost that's been incurred from you developing the project, then that could be included as a pre-award cost, and it is only reimbursed if the project is awarded. As far as like how the funding flows and different things like that, MEMA's policy is we do not advance funds. So if you are awarded a project, you will complete said task, pay it, submit the required documentation back to us, and you will be reimbursed for that. We do allow people to submit reimbursements on whatever frequency that they would like to. So it's not like you have to wait like every quarter to do it, but it is a reimbursement program, but it won't pay for any previous projects that have been completed. All right. Is it feasible to submit for a construction project if you have 30% engineered plans confirming viability, but still need to finish design and permit the project? So we've seen it. unfortunately, because like every project is not reviewed by the same reviewer, we've kind of seen different approaches to this. So we've certainly had some projects where they don't come in with 100% E&D, and those projects are still awarded. We have also seen some projects where they've come in with 100%, but they've not been awarded. So I think in this scenario, if there's enough information there just to confirm that like it could be technically feasible and effective, I would say you would be free to proceed. And it might be an instance where as you make your way through the design and engineering process that you're submitting those updated plans. So when you get to 60%, 85%, and so on, you submit those to us so that we can submit them to FEMA. Is this submission a pre-application or application for the type of submission question? So this will be an application. And then again, if you are a CCB activity, so the capacity and capability building, you'll use the planning sub-application. And for projects like construction activities, you will use the project sub-application type. All right, in order to get compensated for prior expenses, do we have to have already expended the funds in order to get reimbursed, or can FEMA pay? So this is an interesting question, because generally for like the pre-award costs, people are submitting for like in-kind services, and a lot of times people use those pre-award costs to go towards their non-federal share. But again, it's only reimbursement, so you would need to pay for those costs, so expend the funds and then get reimbursed, and you would only be reimbursed if the project is awarded. All right, so did you say that MEMA will only reimburse sub-applicants for paid project invoices, not pay those invoices directly? That is 100% correct. We are looking for your paid invoice and then your proof of payment as well too. So that might be, if you're doing in-kind services, that might be your payroll printout, canceled checks, different things like that. So strictly reimbursement. MEMA will not be paying any contractors directly. Okay, reimbursable projects. What about projects that are funded but will have tasks remaining if grant funds are awarded? For this one, I think we probably need to discuss this a little bit more in detail, just to make sure that you're in compliance with CFR, as far as like there is no subplating of funds happening here. And then also FEMA is very like, they're very stern on making sure that it is a standalone project. So just figuring out if this is like a phased project, but like the specific phase that you're requesting FEMA grant funds for is a standalone project. So for this one, if you could email us and let us know which project that this is, we can give you an answer like more appropriate. Okay. All right, and so we are out of time. So with that, thank you everybody. Again, FEMA Go, please get us your information. We'll send all this stuff out today, and thank you for joining us. Have a good week.